Failed to start the video camera.
So I finished the postcard.
Oh, did you?
The postcard that's
Yeah,
gonna go out
yeah,
to all the wineries.
Yeah,
And we're
cool.
gonna ask you to turn your cameras off and make
Yeah.
Okay, but it's not on gallery, right?
I have this one.
Oh, you can record it.
Start out with a little bit of a housekeeping, but first of all, I just wanted to welcome everybody back. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
So great that you have that you enjoyed it so much last week. We got some wonderful feedback, and we really appreciate it. We're really excited to host our second night. And as Christine said, just a reminder for some housekeeping protocols. It's please go ahead and mute yourselves and use the chat to ask any questions. And Christine will be monitoring those questions and bringing them forth. And we'll try to answer as many as we can. Yeah, last week we did really good. We answered all the questions and we didn't have anything else to answer, but this week we may have some more. We're really gonna dive deep. You have an amazing night ahead of you, so get ready. Christine is also going to send out the PowerPoint, and we'll be able to give you some more information if you're not able to get it all in your head, because it's going to be quite a night. So so Marcus will go ahead and get us started talking about what we have to expect for tonight.
So why don't we begin with a little salute. Salute to everybody who has joined tonight so that we can talk about these wonderful
Cheers.
varieties.
Salud.
Salute.
Cheers.
So what you have here is Garnacha Blanca. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about this series. So last week, we started with the coastal varieties. Now remember, Spain has a lot of varieties. So we just talked about two of many coastal varieties. One was a variety from the Atlantic coast, Albarino, and the other one was a variety from the Mediterranean coast, Monastrell, otherwise known as Movedra, Mataro, and it's traveled a bit and gotten different names. Tonight, we're going to completely switch course. We're going to get away from the coasts of Spain, and we're going to go more into the interior. And we're going to talk a little bit about two varieties in particular. One is the Garnacha Blanca that you have in your glass, hopefully by now. It belongs to a family of varieties that is the Garnacha family. And we'll talk a little bit about the larger family, but really then drill into the Garnacha Blanca. And then the Tempranillo, which we have in the bottle here and we'll be pouring later, which a lot of people call the Cabernet of Spain, but it is truly a phenomenal varietal. And we'll get deeper into that. So with that, before we go on, are there any other housekeeping notes that we need to talk about?
No, I think you guys got the Zoom thing down, and like I said, questions, throw them onto the chat. And so let's take it away.
Fantastic. So as a bit of a review, first of all, you have to understand that I just absolutely am passionate about Spanish varieties. I'm passionate about the wine business and viticulture in general. So to be able to have an opportunity, a forum to talk to people who are actually even interested in this subject is phenomenal for me. I love it. So what about, give a little context of what we're talking about. We're talking about Spain. We're talking about varieties in Spain. Spain's a unique country. Last time we talked about how it has 70 different wine regions, understood and codified wine regions throughout the country. Coastal, mountainous, valley, everything. And within those 70 regions, there's 87 recognized red varieties and 80 recognized white varieties. So that's over 160 varieties that are planted throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And I think that's really a testament to the area and its ability to grow wonderful wine grapes and wine. One of the things that I think defines Spain is so unique, again, is the fact that it has so many mountain ranges. It's second only to Switzerland in elevation in Europe. And you have the Cantabrian range along the Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay. You've got the Pyrenees that go all the way down to the Mediterranean. You have many different crisscrossing ranges that create different valleys, different cultures, different cuisines, different languages, and over 160 different varieties, two of which we're going to taste tonight. So with that, I'd like to mention just briefly my connection to one of these valleys, the Ebro River Valley. If you think of Spain and its watersheds, every body of water, every river, every lake drains to the Atlantic. Everything goes west, with the exception of the Ebro River. The Ebro River starts in the west and drains east, and it goes through this wonderful area known as the Rioja, what we're going to take a look at later with the Tempranillo. And when it finally ends in its trajectory towards the Mediterranean, it goes right by the village that my family's from, called San Carlos de la Rápita. So we were actually rice growers. We weren't into the wine business, but we're very intimately attached to the Ebro River and all the wines from all over Spain. So with that, maybe we can delve a little bit more into the Garnacha grape.
Yes, we're gonna go all in Garnacha.
All in Garnacha.
All in Garnacha.
So the, do you have the slide up there of the different, so there's mountainous Spain right there. You can see all of the brown areas are all the high different mountains that divide the valleys. There is northern Spain that we're going to be focusing primarily with the Garnacha and with the Tempranillo that can be found along the base of the Pyrenees. So within the Garnacha family, you have many different colors of Garnacha. So Garnacha is a very unstable variety and creates a lot of different mutations. The Pinot Noir family is the same. You have Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir. In Garnacha, you have Garnacha Blanca, which is what you have in your glass. You have Garnacha Gris. You have Garnacha Tinta, which we typically know as Garnacha, which is red Grenache. You have Garnacha Peluda, hairy Grenache. I wonder how many of you have ever heard of hairy Grenache. Hardly anyone makes it into a separate varietal. The leaves are full of little hairs that do something very interesting viticulturally, and finally to the final wine, that people love it as a percentage of the final blend. And then you have the Garnacha Tintorera. And tinta, as you can imagine, means color. Okay, something that's tinted, that's colored. And the Garnacha Tintorera is a cross between Grenache and another variety. Some people call it the Alicante Boucher. It creates tremendous color in wines because it has a very unique thing going on. One is that the skin is full of color, but the pulp is too. If you open up any table grape, if you open up any berry from a wine grape, you'll notice the pulp is always white on the inside. The Tintorera is actually colored all the way through. So those 5 different varieties of Grenache attest to its genetic instability. And the thing about that is that that instability allows and has allowed this variety to basically travel through all of northern Spain, parts of France and Italy, and adapt to different areas because of its ability to mutate and adapt to new terrains. So I think that's very unique.
So it has like the name Grenache in France and Canonau in.
Yeah, so it has the
Italy.
name Grenache. It has Canonau. In parts of Italy, they also call it Tinta Aragonese, which is actually a name that harkens back to its place of origin. So it's a very well distributed variety in those countries. One other thing that's really interesting about the variety is that, you know, let's say you have a Cabernet and it's known for red wines, or you have a Merlot known for red wines, or you have a Chardonnay known for white wines. But in the family of Garnacha, you can make white wines, rosé wines, red wines, sparkling wines, dessert wines, and sherries. 6 different types of wines made from the same family of grapes, the mutation only of which is the amount of pigment in the skin. You won't find any other variety that can do that, and no one really talks about that, but it's very, very unique to that variety. And I thought that that would be one of the reasons why we should talk about this mountainous variety and all of its permutations, but then really drill down on the Garnacha Blanca. So one of the things to understand why it got distributed so far and wide through the world is because of this ability to mutate genetically. But it started out in an area that was known as the Kingdom of Aragon and Catalonia. So you have to go back in history. You have to think about that Spain did not exist. Spain existed as a construct from 1492 and on. But prior to that, it was a separate series of kingdoms that ultimately intermarried their royalty to create Spain, finally with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabel, who paid for the voyage of Columbus to go to the New World. But prior to all of that, there was, amongst many kingdoms, the Kingdom of Aragon and Catalonia. And it was a very powerful kingdom, and it was a seafaring kingdom. And up along the Pyrenees and part of Aragon, there was this really rocky, craggy area with tremendous cold northerly winds, kind of like what we're experiencing here in Lodi today with the north winds. that very few vines could grow in. And the Garnacha was beautifully suited to these kind of rugged conditions. The Aragonese brought it to Catalonia. The Catalans that were very seafaring took it to Sardinia, where they call it Canonau, to Corsica, to different parts
Is
of.
that what's on the map?
That's
here?
exactly what you see on the map.
Okay.
The map in front of you, everything that is blue, if you can go to that, perfect. Yeah, that is the old kingdom of Aragon and Catalonia. And Grenache, where it is today, has a perfect footprint over that area. That started around 800 AD. So the Muslims were still in Spain and they were slowly but surely getting pushed out. These kingdoms emerged around 800 to about 1200 AD. So way before Christopher Columbus, this kingdom was established and Grenache was spread through that part of the world because of this kingdom. And so what you have is a series of areas, like for example, Campo de Borja or Somontano, that are located in modern day Aragon, the province in Spain. And this is a classic picture of that area. This is the Pyrenees in the background, young Grenache vine, old Grenache vines, excuse me, being handpicked. And then you go into the Priorat in Catalonia or the Terra Alta. We have a picture of the Terra Alta here. And it's the next slide. There we go. That's the Terra Alta. Again, the Terra Alta, the highlands, high elevation Grenache being grown in bush vines in very extreme climatic conditions. You then go to areas that used to be part of Spain, Ribesaltes, Banyuls, Mauri, that's all on the northern part of the Pyrenees. And then finally, you go to Sardinia, Sicily, Calabria. This is where you find the Grenache. So you think, well, I know that Grenache is in France too, right? I mean, why aren't we talking about Grenache and Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the Côte du Rhône? Well, it's because Grenache never had, or France never had Grenache until finally, amongst one of the many times that the Catalans wanted to create independence against Spain, they broke away from Spain in 1659, one of the many times that they broke away and failed. The Spaniards fought them. The French joined the Spanish side and helped defeat the Catalans and bring it back into the Spanish Empire. And as a gift, Spain cut off a part of Catalonia and gave it to France. That's all the land that is north of the Pyrenees in an area called Roussillon. That's where you have beautiful, beautiful Grenache being grown mostly into dessert wines like Banyuls or Rivesaltes. That's when Grenache became French, because the French got a piece of Spain. Then shortly after that, after 1659, Grenache slowly started migrating to the Rhone River Valley, and it became the preeminent grape in Châteauneuf-du-Pape and in the southern Rhone. So that's how it got into France. So it's a pretty interesting history. There is a lot of Grenache in the world, but I'm not going to talk about Grenache. I'm going to talk about Grenache Blanc. There's not a lot of Grenache Blanc in the world. Garnacha Blanca was a mutation from the Garnacha Tinta that also occurred in the Pyrenees in Spain. And it made its way to different areas in Catalonia, and it really found its home in the Terra Alta. There is more Grenache Blanc grown in Terra Alta than any other denomination in Spain. So in Spain, currently there's about 5,200 acres of Garnacha Blanca grown. That's not a lot. In the 80s, there was 40,000 acres of Garnacha grown. So it has seen a huge decline in plantings in Spain through about the late 90s. And now we're seeing a resurgence of planting because people realize, what are we doing? This is a phenomenal variety.
So what's happened? What made the difference? Why did it decline?
Well, back in the 80s and all the way through the early 90s, in fact, the time that we were living in Spain, I remember in the Terra Alta in particular, people ripping out vineyards and planting almond orchards everywhere. And it was because of an EU, a European Union policy, basically to fund certain crops in certain countries. So to make every country happy, one country got subsidies to plant almonds, another got subsidies to plant grapes, etc. And so Spain got almonds and France got grapes. And so a lot of grapevines that were not considered to be really high quality were ripped out of the ground. Places like Albarino in the Rías Baixas were seen a little bit more favorably and didn't get ripped out of the ground. But the Garnacha Blanca certainly did. So the French increased their acreage of Grenache Blanc while you saw a reduction of acreage in Spain. This is since reversed. People have seen the mistake and realized Garnacha Blanca is such an amazing variety, and particularly Spanish style Garnacha Blanca, that we're now seeing a resurgence in acres in Spain. But at the same time that today there's 5,200 acres of Garnacha Blanca in Spain, there is, I have it here, 21,000 acres of Garnacha Blanca in France. It's the fourth widest planted variety in France,
Wow.
behind Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Chenin Blanc. Number 4.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of acres there for a variety that originated in the base of the Pyrenees in Spain. So that's a little bit about, you know, how much there is today of the Garnacha Blanca. But again, I just want to bring back this whole idea that while Garnacha can travel really well, part of the way it looks, the short, stout shoots, the big leaves, and the very upright growth create these perfect little bush vines that in high elevation, rocky soils, wind blown with the Mistral or the Tramontana winds, is the perfect little haven to make sure that these clusters ripen in the way that they do. Something like an Albarino, this sinuously long canes with small clusters, would be ruined in the high elevation mountains of the Spanish winelands. So something to consider. Another thing that the Garnacha really likes, and Tempranillo as well, is really hot days and really cool nights. It really allows the Garnacha to maintain really good acidity. The Garnacha Blanca, some of the notes, and we'll get more into the details of what our Garnacha Blanca is and what we're trying to achieve with our Garnacha Blanca, but you get this beautiful straw color. It doesn't have an intense yellow, or it doesn't have a real clarity. It has a light straw color. That's a classic Garnacha Blanca. You'll get a lot of notes of citrus. You'll get some fennel notes, white flower, and you tend to get, with Garnachas of higher alcohol, a real textured glycerol type of mouthfeel with, and that is certainly more of a French style. When you go more into the Spanish style, you have more of a muted style. You don't want to have that real thick, heavy wine. It's going to be a little lighter in style. So that's a little bit about Garnacha Blanca, and if there's any questions, we'd love to hear them, but we could talk a little bit about our Garnacha.
Well, I think, Marcus has been talking for a little bit. If you guys need to put a little more Garnacha Blanca in your glass, we can do that so that we can talk a little bit more about the Bokish Garnacha Blanca, which, by the way, was almost an endangered species a couple of years ago. So I think about 5 years ago, I had been here for a couple of years, and we were looking at our lineup of wines, and we were making a ton of white wines. I mean, we make 3 Albarinos, for goodness sakes. And so we were looking at our white wines, and we were thinking, maybe we should cut something. And I said, maybe we should just get rid of the Garnacha Blanca. And oh my goodness, I think that Marcus was going to stab me in the heart when I said that. Because to be fair, Garnacha Blanca out in the marketplace with our distributor, we would go out and wine buyers would love our Garnacha Blanca, but they would say, well, you know, our consumer doesn't really understand it, whatever, we can't sell it. And so I said, hey, maybe we should cut it. Nope, we didn't do it. And I am so happy that we didn't, because then I actually had the opportunity to go to Spain without the Bokishes. I was with my husband. We just went for a trip, and we went to the Terra Alta. And I was able to go to a bunch of different wineries and taste all of these different Garnacha Blancas. And I realized why Marcus wanted to stab me in the heart when I said, let's get rid of the Garnacha Blanca, because it is an amazing variety. It is such an amazing wine. And in our entire lineup of white wines, it is so different. And the amazing thing, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the wine consumer now is actually understanding Grenache Blanc a little bit more, and understanding, you know, it's an amazing wine. So if you want to taste and swirl your wine right now, I think the thing is, we very similar to Spanish Garnacha Blanca. So we've got the straw color, we've got really good acidity. This is now, you have the 2019 Garnacha Blanca, so it's a little over a year old.
And so as Grenache Blanca ages, it really does develop a lot of different flavors. And so this actually has now more nuanced flavors of like dried apricot or apricot. If you're from California, I'm from New York, I say apricot. And I'm going to say another word that is very New York, orange, orange blossom, and some like ripe Bosc pear. So it's got a lot of different flavors. And so the really interesting thing about this wine is as it ages, it gets more nuanced and it develops all these complex flavors. So it definitely doesn't die off as it ages, it just gets more of these complex flavors. So, and talking about how this might be very similar to a Spanish Grenache Blanca, we're going to talk a little bit about our international Grenache competition experience. So a couple of years ago, what was it, 2017?
2017.
Yeah,
2017.
2017. that's
So
the
we
year.
decided we were going to enter the international Grenache competition because this is a competition that is run by a French organization and it is specifically run in Europe, but anybody can enter throughout the world. We were the very first American winery to enter the competition. We've still been the only American winery over 4 years now to enter the competition.
Yeah.
And so that very first year, the competition was being held in the Terra Alta region of Spain. So we thought, we've got to enter. We're going to go. We're going to do it. So we entered our Grenache Blanca and our Garnacha. And I knew that our Garnacha probably wouldn't do so well because Garnacha in Lodi is young vines. We're not blending a lot of other stuff into it, especially here at Bocage. We are very true to the variety. We might blend like maybe 5% Graciano into it, but really not that much. So you really are getting this like bright, light strawberry flavor, some pepper. But in Europe, you're getting much darker Granachas. But our Grenache Blanca, to me, was very much like a Terra Alta Spain Grenache Blanca. And so I thought we were going to do really well. So very first American winery to enter, out of 800 plus wines from Italy, Spain, France, South Africa, Australia, the only American winery, but 800 plus wines, only 100 or so wines received gold medals. We received a gold medal for our Grenache Blanca. So it was an amazing experience. We were there for we weren't there participating in the tasting, but we were there for the ceremony, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. So we're very excited about that, very proud about being able to be part of it. But that just goes to show that our Grenache Blanca is very much stylistically like that Spanish Grenache Blanca.
And I think it really goes a testimony to the two of you to have our American California wine amongst the competition of the European wines that we were just talking about. It was like the biggest honor and compliment, because that's one thing we're always trying to achieve is really be true to the varietal as much as possible. And between the farming techniques, the detail that you have in the vineyard, and then the winemaking techniques, and then you guys come together and you study when we should bring it in and what's the right Brix level. And we've been studying this for years. And, you know, we're really getting it dialed in. And you guys are like the dream team, you know, of making it happen, you know. And so it's amazing. And then, I mean, there's so much texture in this wine. Is that just naturally from the grape, or is that coming out of some magic you do in the cellar at least?
No, that's actually from the grape. So you're getting some tannin there, which is pretty amazing. So we ferment and age in neutral oak, but it's neutral oak. So you're really not getting much texture. You're getting a little bit of texture, but not that tannin and not that grip that you're getting on the finish. That's from the grape. It's really amazing. It's from the grape, and the Vista Luna vineyard really year after year has produced some amazing Grenache Blancas.
Yeah, it is. while the United States may not have a lot of Garnacha Blanca, we do have some very good vineyards in this country that
We
do
do.
some amazing Garnacha
Yep.
Blancas, because ours did not win a gold once, but twice.
Yeah, that was, the first year was like really exciting,
Yeah.
but the second year we got
That
gold was like an endorsement, like
Yeah.
it wasn't just a one-off, got lucky kind of moment. It
Yeah.
was really like, wow, we really are onto something. So
Yeah, to think about a competition where there wasn't even a category to click, oh, I'm from the United States. And I think Elise had to actually call and say, hey, how come there's no button for the United States?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, no one ever asked.
Do you know there still isn't?
There's-
There still isn't.
that's funny. Well, and also we've gotten some great awards here in the United States with the Wine Enthusiast and the Wine Spectator.
Yeah.
With 90 points consecutively. So we're really excited. We didn't nix the program, and we are keeping it here to stay. And besides, this is one of my favorite food wines. One of my favorite recipes to pair with this is gambas, or shrimp in a saffron cream. There's something about this wine that can really bring you over to more of the spices and herbs that you can have in a
Yeah.
white wine. And so think about a roasted chicken with tarragon and thyme and root vegetables coming right out of the oven. This is going to be your winner right here. And so it's a wonderful wine that can pair with all kinds of things. So, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm going to get hungry talking
I was
about
gonna
all
say,
this
like,
stuff
can we
coming
have
up.
some
So
of that?
So we have a question, you guys.
Yeah.
Do we make a red Grenache?
oh,
And what
Oh.
is there a story behind that as well?
Yeah. We do make a red Grenache. We call it Garnacha. In Spain and also in France, typically the red Grenache is like what people mostly know Grenache for. So you don't have to give it a qualifier, like a Garnacha Tinta or in Spain, or Garnache or Grenache Noir. People just call Grenache Grenache, and they just assume that's the red variety. So we do make a beautiful Garnacha. We've made it from the very get-go when we started. The budwood we brought in from that vineyard comes from two different locations. One is the Priorat, which has some really beautiful selections of Garnacha. And the other one is from Costes del Segre, which is another region. So we have two different selections of Garnacha that help in the complexity of that final blend. And it's a variety that we have loved time immemorial. We absolutely love it. The reason why we're focusing on Garnacha Blanca today is because it's a variety that's harder to find in the marketplace. It's an incredible example of what you would find in Europe, in Spain in particular. And also, our little village in Spain, which is at the very base of the Ebro River that I was talking about earlier, if you take a boat up the Ebro River and you get to where you're breaking through the coastal mountain range, on the right-hand side, way up on the mountains, is the Priorat. And on the left-hand side, way up on the mountains, is the Terra Alta. And the Garnacha Blanca really has its highest and fullest expression in the Terra Alta, which is the closest wine region to our village. And that's one of the reasons why I had my dagger ready when Elise said, I don't think we should be doing this. I'm like, no, but we must.
Go to
We
Spain.
must do
Yeah.
this. So in
Yeah.
any event,
But our
And our
Garnacha,
vineyard is named Terra
Terra
Alta.
and
Oh,
our
yeah.
vineyard is named
Of
Terra
course.
Alta, which, by the way, has a funny story, because we named it Terra Alta because while we're in Lodi, we're in the very eastern section of Lodi in the rolling hills. We're at about 300 feet. The rest of Lodi goes down towards sea level. So we are truly in the highlands of the Terra Alta of Lodi, right? Hard story to sell when you're sitting in the Terra Alta with a bottle of Grenache that just won a gold, and you're meeting the director of the Terra Alta Denominación de Origen, their AVA. And I remember sweating bullets going, oh my God, he's going to sue me for having stolen the name of their AVA. And he gave me the biggest bear hug saying, thank you for promoting our region in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like,
yeah.
oh my God, that's
And,
great.
and our red got a gold
We
last
won a
year.
gold last year.
The
Yeah.
2017.
Yeah.
And also we're coming out with 91 points in Wine Enthusiast. So you guys
Yeah.
are really knocking it out of the ballpark. So
Well, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a team effort.
I just get to do the food part. It's so fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
So
Yeah.
when you're tasting this Garnacha, think about the history. We're talking about from 800 AD. We're talking about, gosh, what is that? That's 12, almost 1300 years of history of this variety traveling around the world, making it to the far reaches of California and Lodi, and finally, it's still finding its full expression. It's so exciting. When we go to Tempranillo, we're going to be talking about a very late comer in the wine game in Spain. This variety showed up last to the party and left a huge impression.
Yeah.
So, if you guys
Any
are-
more questions on the Garnacha Blanca before we move on to Tempranillo?
We'll do this last question at the end.
Okay.
We'll move on to the Tempranillo.
All right, excellent. Let's go ahead and get your other glass out and right, yourself. I'm going to go ahead and pour for Elise.
Well, while you're pouring, I'll mention a little bit about a similarity between Tempranillo and, of all varieties, Albarino. So we talked about the Camino de Santiago, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. This is a big pilgrimage route that goes to one of the biggest pilgrimage sites of Europe, which is the city of Santiago de Compostela, literally St. James of the Starry Field. That's the name of Santiago de Compostela. And lots of pilgrims went around northern Spain all the way from the early parts of the Middle Ages all the way until today. People still walk the Camino de Santiago. But the pilgrims in the old days would come bearing gifts for giving to the Cathedral of Santiago. And so the myth was that maybe Albarino was one of these cuttings that made it from Germany and was planted in the Rias Baixas and made these Riesling type wines until the DNA story came out like 15 years ago, where we recognized that Albarino is in fact a very, very native variety, native to Galicia. Same is true of Tempranillo. Tempranillo was thought to be a variety that had been brought over by Cistercian monks. This is a classic picture of Tempranillo grapes. And they had been brought over from Burgundy. They thought it was maybe a relative to Pinot Noir, and it had shown up at some point in the Middle Ages, and you can still see this in the literature today. Well, in 2010, researchers in the Viticulturist Institutes of Madrid determined that, in fact, Tempranillo is a very Iberian variety with two parents. And if you look at the map here, if you go back to the map, good, there, you'll see an orange area right in the middle, which is the Rioja. And the lighter orange is Navarra. And they're both regions that are right up against the Ebro River, the river that I was talking to you about that ultimately makes it to our little town along the Mediterranean coast. Well, if you look to the left of the Rioja, you'll see a green region. That's Castilla-León. Castilla-León is the heart of Castilian culture. That's where the Spanish language came from, one of only 5 languages in Spain. In that region, there's a variety called Albio Mayor. It was the father of the Tempranillo. If you go all the way to the other side of the Ebro, you're going to get to an area called the Somontano, which is just a little tiny pink area that you'll see right there by the arrow. The Somontano is right up against the Pyrenees, high elevation vineyards, little tiny towns dot this whole area. It's so picturesque. And in one of those towns, there was a small town that grew this variety, Benedicto, probably from the Benedictine monks. In any event, these varieties circulated around the Iberian Peninsula, but from their original areas, they both made it eventually right to the Rioja. And if you look at the distances, it's about equidistant from both areas. So the Albio Mayor from Castilla-León and you have Benedicto from Aragon work their way to Rioja, and they have a baby. And that baby is Tempranillo.
Shouldn't it be like Albio Benedicto Jr. or something?
Yeah, it probably should. And so genetically, we know this for a fact. It comes from those 2 varieties. It's not Pinot Noir, it's not Pilgrims, it's very Iberian. But what's interesting is that, you know, crosses happen pretty often, but seldom do you get a cross that is so good, and it's the good ones that survive. And so Tempranillo started slowly but surely taking the place of Garnacha. Now, the Rioja and Navarre had many different varieties, but if there was one variety that pretty much took the valley floors up, it was Garnacha. And slowly but surely, the Tempranillo started taking land away from the Garnacha. Now, Tempranillo doesn't do well on the hillside slopes. It doesn't do as well as it does on the valley floor. So the Garnacha stayed fine up there. But sure enough, the Tempranillo slowly but surely went occupying the space of the Garnacha. And it did that for 200 to 300 years. To give you some context, The Tempranillo is thought to be a variety that appeared on the scene in the 1500s. Now, by that time, Ferdinand and Isabel had married. They had conquered the rest of all these kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula, except for Portugal, and they created the modern state of Spain.
Well, and I just remember like this thing that happened in 1492.
Someone named
Columbus
Columbus.
sailed the ocean
The
blue,
ocean
right?
blue.
So this is after.
This is after
This
Columbus.
is like this is pretty far.
Yeah.
After in history.
Yeah, this is like 10, 15 years after Columbus discovers what he thought was the Indies. And sure enough, then suddenly people are beginning to realize there's this variety called Tempranillo. But by then, Spain is a country, right? It's not it's not necessarily trading vines with different parts of the world, but because it's become a country, then Tempranillo can go from the Rioja to different parts of Spain, and it begins to travel ever so slowly over 200 to 300 years to almost every wine growing region of Spain, because people realize that it is such a good and interesting variety. It has thick skins, it has lots of anthocyanins, it gives tons of color. It's just a really wonderful variety overall, and people recognize that. So as it's traveling to these different areas, people are saying, hey, I got some budwood, and what are we going to call it? And they start giving it synonyms. Now, of all the varieties in viticulture, Tempranillo has more synonyms than any other variety that are recognized. There are 66 names for Tempranillo, depending on what part of Spain you're from. And I'm going to just list 13 of them right here. So in Castilla-La Mancha, another part of Old Castile, they call it Sensibel. Tinto del País comes from Madrid. So just right around the heart of Spain, they call it basically the tinted or the colored wine of Madrid. Tinto Fino from the Ribera del Duero, which is north of Madrid on the Duero River. Tinto Fino, so the fine tinted wine, the fine colored wine. Tinta de Toro from Zamora. So that is the colored wine of Zamora. And then the Extremadurans went kind of crazy with their names. Extremadura is this part of Spain right up against Portugal. It's very mountainous. If you've ever had jamón serrano, it was probably from Extremadura. Most of the conquistadors who went to the New World were from Extremadura. They're just extreme people, and they came up with extreme names like Arganda and Escobera and Chichillana. But those are all synonyms for Tempranillo. There's many more that you can read in California. We called it for years Valdepeñas. We gave it a name of a region in Spain that had nothing to do with Tempranillo, but that is a synonym here, the original synonym in California. And of course, in Catalunya, we call it eye of the rabbit or eye of the hare, ull de llebre, because of how round the berries are on the cluster of the Tempranillo.
So why so many different names? of
Well,
Tempranillo, or
because
that's-
people were passing cuttings along, and then they would just basically in their region say, well, this is a great that we like, and we're going to call it the dark wine of the region, as opposed to other wines that maybe didn't have as much color. So it's a very interesting thing, and they get named for different reasons. But I think it's really curious that this one variety, more than any other variety in Spain, can be found as a accepted variety in 38 different denominaciones de origen. No
Yeah.
other Spanish variety is an accepted variety in so many different regions.
However, in the United States, it's still only Tempranillo.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can still only call it Tempranillo. You can have all of those other names, but the TTB only recognizes
That's true.
Tempranillo.
And I remember when we were growing the Tempranillo in Lodi, and I'm like, Tempranillo, of course, temprano, early. That's what Tempranillo means in Spanish. Temprano is early. Tempranillo is the little early one, right? Early. Wow. Well, when I plant it, it's one of the last reds to harvest, except maybe it harvests a little bit earlier than Grenache. And that's when I realized that's why it's called Tempranillo, because in its place of origin in the 1500s, the vines that it was displacing were Grenache.
Yeah.
And Grenache harvests about 15 days after Tempranillo. And as a grower, I know that in the fall, you're looking at the sky, hoping for no rains, and 15 days can be the difference between harvest and not harvesting. And as a winemaker, seeing the intensity of the color of the wine, the resultant wine, it's also highly prized. So growers prized it, winemakers prized it. But the reason it got its original name, Tempranillo, and really its base name, Tempranillo, is because it harvests 15 days más temprano than the Garnacha. So Anyhow, what's interesting is that Tempranillo really, like, we talked about Monastrell that traveled all the way from Lebanon. We talked about Garnacha that traveled all the way to Calabria. There's some varieties like Albarino that really didn't move around a lot. Well, Tempranillo, for being such a great variety and considered one of the noble varieties of the world, hardly ever left the Iberian Peninsula. So it kind of got spread all over Spain very, very slowly until about 1890. And then it exploded all over Spain because phylloxera hit Spain. This little tiny root louse, this insect that had destroyed the European, the French vineyards in the 1860s, finally made it over to Spain in the 1890s. And every wine region in Spain had to reinvent themselves. And when they did that, they said, well, let's bring in varieties that might improve the wines of our region. And that's where Tempranillo really spread its reach all over the Iberian Peninsula. And I say Iberian because it also spread at the same time to Portugal, where it's known as Tinta Roriz, and it's used in beautiful, beautiful still wines and in port production. But why didn't it leave Spain? And one of the reasons it didn't leave Spain is because it wasn't the 1100s. It wasn't the 1200s. There weren't all these people attacking and moving stuff around anymore. It's like France was France and the French borders were defined. Spain was Spain and Portugal was Portugal. And you saw a lot of mixing within those countries, but not across borders. So Tempranillo he was late to the game. And so it really had very little impact outside of Spain. But you say, well, Spain, and Portugal, they had world empires. They conquered the Americas. Why didn't they bring it to the Americas? Well, they needed wine in the Americas because the people who were colonizing the Americas, as we well know in California, but true in New Mexico and Texas too, is that you had the padres that were building the missions, and they needed sacramental wine. They needed to have the blood of Christ for their ceremonies. And so they needed to have wine. And the Spanish government said, you can bring seeds over, grapevine seeds, to grow into plants and make your sacramental wine. One of those wines is the Mission variety of California. There's another one called the Rose of Peru in South America. But they're all relatively mediocre wines. It's hard to get a really good wine out of seeds. They didn't allow for the importation of cuttings. Now, any variety that you have retains its varietal character because you take a cutting from the vine and you plant it in a new vineyard. And genetically, you get the exact same thing. There's no sexual reproduction. It's all asexual. As soon as you take seeds from a grapevine, what you get is completely different from either parent. As all parents know, the kids just come out to be who they are. They're not the parents, right? So the reason why Spain did not allow for the importation of cuttings and only that of seeds is because they did not want the new world.
Lost it completely now.
They did not want the new world to create a wine industry that would compete with the motherland. So they prohibited the making of fine wines in the New World, so there would be no competition with Spain. So we don't have any Tempranillo history in California until after California becomes a state of the union. In the 1860s, we get Valdepeñas to come into California and other parts of the United States. So that's why that variety stayed so within the borders of the Iberian Peninsula.
Except for Marcus Bokish.
So
You actually, let's talk about Marcus Bokish and Tempranillo pioneering. Forget all that missionaries and all that stuff. What have you done for Tempranillo in the wine industry?
Well, just to give it a little context before that, is there's like 574,000 acres of Tempranillo in the world. 87% of those acres are located in Spain and another 8% in Portugal. So 95% of all the Tempranillo in the world is on the Iberian Peninsula, which
So
to
what's
me,
in California?
so what's in California is some of the best stuff Spain has to offer,
Yeah.
because we realized early on that what we had in California were at best poor selections that had been made and brought over anywhere from the 1860s to the 1930s. And they were focused more on production viticulture, large quantities of grapes to be grown in the South Central Valley for moderate wine. We wanted to lift the game and try to create some of the best examples of Tempranillo, similar to what you would find in the two AVAs, the denominaciones that I think have defined Tempranillo in Spain, and that is the Rioja on the Ebro River, and another area that hopefully you'll all visit one day called the riverbanks of the Duero, the Ribera del Duero AVA. Beautiful Tempranillos are grown in both areas, high elevation locations with just beautiful bush vines that just make absolutely delicious wines. So we wanted to get cuttings from the Ribera del Duero, bring them to California, plant them here, and make wines from our own selections. And that's exactly what we did. But instead of getting just a couple cuttings from one vine, we went to an entire vineyard block and got one cutting from every vine. So we had a heterogeneous selection, a very, very mixed genetic selection of budwood, not a clone. We wanted the complexity, and we brought that over to California. We planted it, and then we gifted that to the University of California and Foundation Plant Services. And I think the results are in your glass.
Yes,
So-
Indeed.
definitely. By
Yeah.
now, this wine I'm sure has opened up. You've been hopefully sipping and swirling along with us. But it is just,
Yeah.
it's really tasting phenomenal. I mean,
This is, honestly, so this was my gateway Spanish wine. I will say that because I didn't discover Spanish wines until I went to Spain on part of my honeymoon. Oh my goodness, now that was 17 years ago. It was a while ago. But discovered Spanish wines and specifically Tempranillo. And I then, when I came back, that was 2004, came back 2006, tasted Bocage wines at a big tasting in San Francisco. And I was like, my goodness, like somebody in California and in Lodi. And at that time, I didn't even know where Lodi was. I was like, where's Lodi? Making Spanish wines, Tempranillo, Albarino. My goodness, this is amazing. And they were making, Marcus and Liz were making amazing wines at that time. And so my husband and I joined the wine club, and that was 2007. 2011, I decided to make my own wines, and I really wanted to make Spanish wines because I was so inspired by them. And so started buying grapes from them, Tempranillo and Graciano and Albarino. But the Tempranillo to me was the one that just really, I mean, it was a wine that really spoke to me because, you know, everybody talks about Cabernet and Zinfandel, but Tempranillo has this really nuanced characteristic that I think it is called the Cabernet of Spain. And so it ages super, super well, like a Cabernet, but it has so many other different qualities that I think Cabernet doesn't have. Like it's just got this great fruit forward characteristic. It's got tannins that are just, can be sort of smoother than Cabernet. And it's an amazing wine. And what we've seen, because Marcus grows it in a couple different vineyards, what we've seen is that soil type really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So the Las Orejas Tempranillo, which is the Bocage's backyard vineyard, it's the mother block, much more tannic. It's got more of a floral characteristic, but that's also because of, I think, the lavender that grows along the vineyard. This Liberty Oaks that you guys have in your glass has a little bit more, it's a little bit more fruit, a little bit more of a spicy leather characteristic. It's like, it's got a little deeper, richer characteristic to it.
Yeah.
So it's really fun to play around with these wines. And, you know, we've got another vineyard coming online soon. You know, that's kind of in the back pocket. Won't tell you about that. But that's also for me as a winemaker, you know, we make 3 Albarinos from 3 different vineyards from 3 different soil types. So it's going to be cool to be able to
Yeah.
see what Tempranillo from all these different sites does. So.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about making a connection between Grenache and Tempranillo, and that is that we talked about how Grenache is like from 800 to 1200, gets distributed through all these different parts of Southern Europe. And today you can go to very different regions, like the clones that we have of Garnacha come from Spain. We have a couple that come from France that we play around with. They're just decidedly different in their cluster architecture, their berry size and
Mhm.
everything. I mean, there's been 1,300 years of tinkering by humans to make this. Tempranillo, latecomer to the game, got spread around Spain pretty fast,
Mhm.
less than 500 years. You can go, it has a whole bunch of synonyms, but you can go to get a Tempranillo from Toro. You can get a Tempranillo from La Mancha. You can get a Tempranillo from Rioja. You plant them side by side, and they have so many more similarities. They
Yeah.
haven't had the time to genetically separate from when it was birthed in the Rioja from Albio Mayor and Benedictine.
Yeah.
So
I will also say that I've actually had very few really bad Tempranillos. Like
Yeah.
I've had some really bad Cabernets or some really bad Pinot Noirs. I don't think I've ever actually had very many really bad Tempranillos.
Because you're drinking Bokish.
Oh, yeah. That is true.
And one of the things I wanted to point out is that we are here in the barrel room, okay? And our barrel program is really important to our Tempranillo because, you know, in Spain, they often use American oak and French oak. And we have over the years played with both, and we also use a little Hungarian oak, but we've kind of slowly over the years kind of whittled down to really focusing on French oak. So I think it's interesting that in Spain, they use so much French oak. And we had the opportunity to go to a cooperage in Spain, Magarañán, where we buy some of our barrels from. And we asked him, like, what about Spanish oak? How come there isn't any Spanish oak trees? I mean, you know, oak trees grow in Spain. They have all the cork that comes from Portugal and in Spain, and all the acorns that are given to the pigs for the jamón serrano, the very best jamón serranos, ibéricos. But it also just has to do with the history and the kings and not really doing reforestation and plantings like they've done in France. But we've over time really held down to deciding that our French oak is your preferred
It
oak,
is.
right? At least.
Yeah, I would say, you know, we've played around with American oak, and I actually, full disclosure, I had a barrel vendor here today who was like, "You should try our American oak." You know, we've played around with it, but we've realized that the French oak and some Hungarian, but mostly French oak, does really well with the wines.
yeah.
And so what we're doing with our program is we've always strived, we're not masking anything. We just want the oak to elevate. So we never want to add, like, we don't want to add oak flavors or, you know, anything else. We just want it to elevate the wines. And so whatever we can do to do that.
So is there no such thing as Spanish oak?
There
Very
is.
little.
There
very
is.
little.
There
yeah.
is. Here's, you know, who heard about the Armada? You know, Spain had an amazing overseas empire and they needed a lot of wood to build their ships, and that ship building exercise deforested Spain in a very significant way, and then the Armada sunk. So so Spain has now, I mean, during Roman times, it was said that a squirrel could go from one end of Spain to the other without ever touching the ground. And that certainly was not the truth for the last 1,500 years. But in the 20th century, there was a huge reforestation program in Spain. And Spain is a lot greener than it has been over the last 1,500 years. So with that, there are now some crazies in Spain that are actually doing what the French have done for a long time, which is pollarding their oak trees. To pollard a tree is to form a tree. A forester will form a tree so that it's long and tall with no knots in it, which means that every time a little tiny branch wants to start, you got to cut it off. Otherwise, it can't be used as a stave in a barrel. There's no knots in a barrel. So that only happened like 30 years ago, right? In France, in the Massif Central, the trees that we are having harvested for our barrels today were brought up by the forester's father or grandfather. It's a multi-generation thing. It doesn't happen right away. So in Spain, the foresters who said, we need to have Spanish oak for our Spanish wine industry only started 30 years ago. And those trees are only now getting to be to the size where we're seeing for the very first
Mhm.
time the use of Spanish oak
Yeah.
to make Spanish barrels. And the general consensus is, it's too young. We need to know more about what of the 7 mountain ranges creates the best oaks for Tempranillo or for, any one of the other many
Oh, yeah. And
varieties.
talk about terroir. I mean, terroir is so important in the wines, but it's also extremely important in your barrels because you have different forests in France that are those soil type differences are gonna add different flavors to your barrel. I mean, we could go down a huge rabbit hole and talk about barrels for at least
Yeah.
1 hour
But just as a
minimum.
thumbnail, like I know that you love Sirug and you
Yeah.
love Magrignan
Yeah.
because they come from certain forests that you
Mhm.
really enjoy,
Certain
right?
forests, yeah.
But it's also the way, it's not just the forest, it's how they fire their barrels.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
because you can have, here's the thing about barrels is you can have 10 different coopers who get their wood from the same forest, but they fire them in a different way. And so that's the thing about being a winemaker where you're just like, I got to try all these different people. It's like all this different,
Yeah.
it's like it's a beauty show, really.
Yeah.
It's
That's well put. Yeah.
it's
That's
a
what it
beauty
is.
show.
Well, another thing I want to, so we are kind of getting towards the end of our time frame here, although we could talk forever. That another thing we haven't talked about yet, you guys, is our Gran Reserva and the fact that Tempranillo is an amazing wine.
Yeah.
It's amazing as a crianza, which is like a baby. It's just fresh and young. And then it goes in a couple more years in, you're in the Reserva stage, which this
This is the
17
Reserva?
Tempranillo is definitely in the Reserva. You got 3 years in, but then there's the Gran Reserva. And Elise, tell us about our Gran Reserva program.
So Gran Reserva, I think this is something that Marcus and Liz have wanted to do for a long time, but because they didn't have their own facility here up until 2014, they couldn't do it. So Gran Reserva is typically combined in Spain, is I think 5 years.
Hmm.
So it's a combination of years in barrel and years in bottle. In Spain, it's typically like 2 years in bottle, 3 years in, or 2 years in barrel, 3 years in bottle. We kind of flipped that on its head. And we, in our first vintage, did 3.5 years in barrel and 2 years in bottle. But it was something that when I started here, Marcus said, I want to do this. Let's do a Gran Reserva. Let's do something where we can age it for a long time because we now have our own facility where we don't have to kick ourselves out. We can just sit in barrel and we'll just taste and taste and taste. And we were doing that. We were tasting throughout. And the longer it aged, we were just like mind blown. It was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, let's just keep going. So our 2014 vintage of Gran Reserva, which is in bottle, was in barrel for about 3.5 years. And it was in bottle it's actually been in bottle for over 2 years now. And it's amazing. It's amazing because Tempranillo, so many people think Cabernet Sauvignon ages so well. It ages so well, and it does. But Tempranillo ages really well. And I will tell you that Tempranillo, just like quick story, I tasted Liz and Marcus's first vintage of Tempranillo from their Las Oasis vineyard, a 2001. I tasted it in 2015. So it was a 14-year-old Tempranillo at that time. And it was an epiphany. It was amazing to taste this. I was like, holy cow, like this is an amazing Tempranillo. And so I realized that Tempranillo really, really can age really well. And what we know now, as we taste through the cellar here in the barrel room, and we continue to taste, everything tastes really good as it ages. And that's the amazing thing. That's really the amazing thing. And so we age it for our consumer.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And in 2014, kind of to inaugurate this winery and having our own barrel room, we started our Grand Reserva program finally. So we have our 2014 available now. We've bottled our 2016. It is now aging. It's not going to come out until at least 2023 at this point. So it needs its time, and we're going to age it for you in perfect cellar conditions and have it ready for you. But we're really sitting on a gold mine, because the other thing is, I mean, with your spearheading these clones, we have 20 years of vertical of California history with these Tempranillos aging. We've always kept back a library wine, and one of our biggest goals is to do a huge vertical tasting.
Yeah, what California can do with Tempranillo. Yeah, it's really a gift to be able to have that and to see that and hopefully to inspire others to do that. And to that end, I think we have actually served as a big inspiration, because how many wineries now just in our region alone?
In Lodi, there's like
16.
16 wineries, and then you see Tempranillo really taking a foothold in Oregon, of course, and in Texas and Arizona, even in Idaho. I mean, Tempranillo is finally really making its presence known of what it can do in the New World. We know it does well in Old World Spain, but in New World, it's a delicious wine. I mean, this is the kind of wine you can pick up and have with something as simple as carne asada tacos or pizza. It does super well with like that chorizo, so the pepperoni or chorizo charcuterie platters. It's great with anything like a nice hearty pasta with meatballs, albondigas as it's known in Spain.
Yeah.
Or just a delicious grilled ribeye. This is your wine. So it's very, very versatile for so many things. So
I'll say actually we've loved aged Tempranillo so much that we're actually taking our Terra Alta and keeping it a little bit longer in bottle, because it just keeps on getting better. And we're fortunately able to do that. But Elise and I were going through cellar space with the barrels, going, okay, if we hold on to the barrel 4 months longer, then that means we need to increase the barrel room, because of course vintages stack one upon another. So you have to think about, there's a lot of difficulties when you're going to hold on to wines for longer than what the standard wine is held on to in the California cellar. But I have to thank all of you so much for staying the course and hopefully enjoying this travel guide through the history of these 4 different varieties over 2 Wednesdays. We know that you're really busy in your regular lives, and to spend time with us. We appreciate your focus and your attention.
Everyone is thanking you guys.
All
too.
right.
So good kudos
Thank you.
to you 3.
Excellent. Well,
And Liz, they're begging for some taco demos from you.
Oh,
so
good,
that's
yes.
what's next.
All right, excellent. Let's do it.
Nice.
Let's do it. I mean, that's the fun. This is a food wine, and I've said this a million times. When you go to Spain, no one has iced tea with lunch. They have wine. It goes with food.
Right.
It's a perfect wine, and all these varieties do so well. And so just to kind of wrap up a little bit here, Christine is going to email you guys. So you're going to be able to get some information. She has a surprise for you that she's going to send out. So look for that email. It's going to have a little something special, a little special offer for you. And if you have any other questions that you'd like to add to the chat or email us later, feel free. We'd also love to get some feedback from you. We're contemplating, I mean, there's so much to talk about. We haven't even talked thoroughly about our red Garnacha Tinta. We have Graciano. I mean, we have a lot of other wines, Verdejo, that we'd love to dive in and maybe do another series in the future. So let us know your interest on that. And we'll stick around for about another 10 minutes to see if there's any further questions. But again, thank you so much for spending time with us. Hope you enjoyed your Bocage wines and have something yummy for dinner, or you've already been nibbling away as we've been talking with you tonight.
So salud to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, salute.
Yeah.
So do we have any
questions?
questions right now?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. So, you answered your pairings. That was good. That was a big. And you guys are welcome to open up your screens at this time if you want to ask the Vogishes a question, and Elise. So, how do we age? Do we age the Tempranillos differently from different vineyards, or do we age kind of the same?
Same. Yeah, so it's, we actually were aging, so interestingly enough, we were doing 18 months. And then we started doing more like 20, actually almost 30 months for the estate. And then last year, we decided to do 24 months for the regular reds. So we're aging 24 to 30 for both.
Yeah, and we're just seeing the improvement in
Yeah.
the wines. You know, one of the things that when you age wines, of course, it's a costly endeavor for the winery. And I remember when we didn't even have a winery and we were custom crushing. Custom crushing is when you're actually utilizing somebody else's facility because you don't own one yourself. The bricks and mortar is expensive. And so there's a charge and you bring your wines there and you have it done. And I remember talking to our bankers at the time thinking, well, I want to do a Gran Reserva. And they'd say, well, what's that? It's like, well, that's a wine that you age for 5 years. And they said, well, you can do that after you pay us off. You can do that after you pay us off. So it's taken us a long time to go down the path to the point where we can't afford to actually age wine for 2 years, 2.5 years, 5 years. And now with the 2016, that's going to be well on 7 years. If you think about Spanish bodegas in the Rioja, a lot of them release their Gran Reservas, obviously when they think it's ready. And sometimes that's 10 years plus. There's a couple wineries that'll hold on to their first releases for 15 years. And the wines are only getting better. And so that kind of harkens back to your experience with our 2001. So not all varieties can do this. And it's a testament to Tempranillo that it just continues to evolve with time. So we always say, you know, if you can buy a bottle of one of our wines, why not buy more?
Yeah.
And then you can just lay them down somewhere, as long as you have a nice, cool place to keep it, nice, cool, dark place to keep it, and see for yourself what happens. It's a very interesting experience.
Do you release every vintage of Gran Reserva?
Oh, that's a very good question. And that's not typically done in Spain, nor is it typically done here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. In the 2014 certainly deserved the Gran Reserva moniker. The 2015 was a good vintage, but we toyed with it and we thought, is it really worthy of Gran Reserva? And yeah, at least made the call finally, like, no, that's not a Gran Reserva. And the 16 certainly was, the 17, you know, so it depends on the vintage. I think we're very lucky that we had a 14 and a 16 so close to each other that made Gran Reserva. So
this is a fun one. Do you have a goal of how many Spanish wines you're planning to produce?
Oh my gosh.
You hit the
That's
nail
a
on the head.
Pandora's box right there.
Well,
Marcus's
you answered
dream
that.
question.
So I always say to Elise, let's do every variety on the Iberian Peninsula. How fun! And so what I've actually been pulled back down to earth with the thought that first you create the varietal collection, right? So we've done a good job through the 90s and the first part of the 2000s in creating a really interesting varietal collection of what we would consider to be the most significant and most internationally renowned wines of Spain. But we're creating a whole other chapter to the story. So we're bringing in other varieties that are lesser known regional varieties that certainly deserve their day in the sun. And those we may make maybe once every 3 years, and they'll become part of our wine club offering. So maybe in the future we'll make like a Mencia, or we'll do a Verdelho again. Or
There's no stopping this guy. You know how many varieties he's planning to bring on? Oh my gosh. We're going to have the largest varietal collection outside of Spain right here in Lodi. Just give
That's
us
the
a few
goal.
more years. We're getting there.
That's the goal.
Another fun question. Do you have a favorite Spanish producer or a most favorite region?
Wow.
Picking
Well,
a
that
favorite
is a
child.
very, very challenging question.
That is a challenging question. Liz and I both love to drink wines very seasonally. So we find ourselves drinking a lot of white wines in the summer and rosés in the summer. And then we go into heartier red wines for the winter with our, stews and dishes and whatnot. So to say that I have a favorite wine, it's difficult. But if I were to have, probably one of my favorite wines is the Graciano, which we haven't even spoken of yet.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole nother
Yeah.
hour at least.
That's a variety that almost got thrown into the trash pile of history and miraculously survived. And it's just an amazing varietal. And hopefully one day I'll get to speak on it.
But I think like the Terra Alta is definitely one of our favorite regions. And
Yeah.
it's Priorat. I mean, first of all, they're very close to our hometown, and they are the Terra Alta. I mean, it's a little bit of the underdog, and we kind of feel that way a little bit by Lodi trying to prove what we can do in amazing wines that we can produce in this region. And I think there's some camaraderie there with the Terra Alta as well. Some
There certainly
incredible
is.
wines and great values. You don't have to have really expensive wines to have incredible values, handcrafted, attention to detail, actual barrels. I mean, so
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that we really dig.
Yeah, I would say the Terra Alta is certainly closest to our hearts for historical reasons and just because of just the amazing wines that it produces. However, there are so many more places that have yet to be discovered. I will tell you right now, back to the Graciano, it was only like 4 years ago that I discovered that there were some crazy people who had planted Graciano in Jerez de la Frontera in the very southern part of Spain in sherry country. And they make a wine called Tintia that just blows your mind. I'm like, oh, when do we get to go see that?
Yeah.
Mallorca has a wonderful viticultural region called Pla y Llevant, and they make some beautiful, beautiful wines in the island of Mallorca. The Canary Islands, in their volcanic soils and the way in which they grow their vines and their delicious white wines in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So there's just so many more places to explore in Spain. So I just need to retire. Wait, how does
All
that
right.
work?
Well, I think that's
Wait,
about
one more
question.
question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are all the Tempranillos in this area from the same rootstock?
Okay. So that's a very good question. The selection that we brought in from Spain accounts for about 75% of all the vineyards in California, Oregon, Arizona, Texas. It's become a really, really important cornerstone of Tempranillo production because it's such a high quality selection. So, but not all of it comes from the same Tempranillo. There are other Tempranillos that have come into California since we brought our selection in that come from different parts of either Portugal or Spain that are phenomenal. And I think that the more you play with different Tempranillos, the better. So, yeah.
All right,
All
guys.
right, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Salute.